Thank you very much for waiting. So now the technology session 1, demand-driven energy transformation shall commence. First of all, I would like to introduce two moderators for the session, Professor Kuroda Reiko and Professor Dr. Yamaji Kenji. Professor Kuroda is an ICEF Steering Committee member, designated professor at the Frontier Research Institute at Chubu University, Professor Emeritus at the University of Tokyo, and a member of G7 Germany Gender Equality Advisory Council. And Professor Dr. Yamaji is also an ICEF Steering Committee member, President of the Research Institute of Innovative Technology for the Earth, and Professor Emeritus at the University of Tokyo. And now I'd like to ask Professor Kuroda to moderate the session. Professor Kuroda, if you please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this technology session 1, that is demand-driven energy transformation. This session focuses on energy transformation on the demand side, that is opposite to supply side, by encouraging behavioral changes in energy consumers. The demand-driven energy transformation primarily involves energy efficiency improvement and renewable energy expansion. So we will discuss the techniques and policy frameworks to assist behavioral changes in enhancing energy efficiency and utilizing renewable energy and social innovation to help the energy demand to be controlled. So this is how we do this session. In the first half an hour, we're going to invite 5 distinguished speakers to present their various insights on energy transformation on the demand side. We have people from academia, from business, and also one youth expert as well. Then we'll have a discussion session and also question and answer Q&A session that follows. I hope we have enough time. So let us start. So we are going to ask the first speaker. The first speaker is Professor Dr. Nakinovich, and Chief Scientific Advisor to the European Commission, Emeritus Scholar at International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and Emeritus Professor of Energy Economics at Vienna University of Technology. Now, Naki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me just say I'm really delighted to be at the 9th ICEF. I had the privilege of participating in all of the 9 so far, but I think it's fantastic that we are all here together in person and there's so many people online. Yeah, I will be talking about energy demand transformations. And by that I mean both behavioral and technology. I think that goes together in order to achieve net zero, hopefully also sustainable development and a beautiful future for everybody. So let me try to illustrate that with this schematic graphic. On the horizontal scale is human well-being, and vertically is the demand. It's provision of services, let's say energy or food. And usually when we look at the sustainable development, often the analyses are made that everybody needs to have basic needs. But there is an opposite challenge here, that some overconsume as well. So there should be also a sufficiency barrier. And so I call it sufficiency corridor, that everybody should have decent living. So more than basic access, but less than overconsumption. And I think that is quite important in the context of behavioral changes because we need it on both sides. And I have no doubt that that will require new technologies, but also new values, norms, perhaps new morality and ethics to achieve this kind of a future. So let me just illustrate why I think this is a big challenge and involves behaviors. If you look on the left side, and this graphic is based on the work of my colleagues from here, right, in Japan and at IASA in Austria. If you look on the left side, this is basically what we need to deal to provide. On the supply side, we need technological innovation and institutional innovation. So that might be something like performance standards improvements, efficiency improvements. But if you look on the right, where we are close to the human behavior, then the situation gets more complicated. We need, in addition to that, we will need new business models, we'll need new behavioral changes. If we are talking about digitalization, then perhaps digital skills, open data, circular economy, and legitimate value capture. So when we deal with people, the situation gets much more complicated. And, but the potential is huge, and that's what I would like to illustrate here, if we have end-use changes. If you look on the top right, you see that the cascades of energy changes, so of energy conversion. So about 72 exajoules of energy are provide services to the people in the world, but 7 times as much primary energy is used. And so any efficiency improvements in that side provide huge savings both in emissions and energy and materials. If you look at all of them, it's a very similar situation in buildings industry, irrigation of water, and on the bottom left you see transport. It's even more extreme. Even larger savings are possible. So the potential is really, really huge. And historically, we have achieved that. So I think this is an excellent example from my colleagues that shows in the middle many analog and digital devices that some of us either use or have used. Together, they would need about 449 watts of energy. Compare that to a smartphone. It needs 100 times less energy. That means 100 times less materials, 100 times less emissions. And on top is the first GSM phone by Motorola from 30 years ago. So in 30 years, everybody in the world essentially has a mobile phone and has more services than the other devices provided. That includes, ironically, even the people who do not have access to electricity. So mobile phone was a huge revolution. And if we look forward in time, maybe I should just also mention that also material used to produce the phones and energy is 25 times lower. So it's a win-win strategy. Now let me come slowly to the conclusion. I think the opportunity of the digital, institutional, and behavioral changes is huge in this area. Let me just mention, and these are some symbols that illustrate what could happen. For example, change from ownership to usership would be much more efficient, shared economy, and importantly, going from independent, automized activities to integrated systemic activities. So all of that together could bring potentials that are as large as the mobile phone has shown over the last 30 years. So let me just conclude by saying that to do this, we need changes in behavior, preferences, sufficiency, what at least I call sufficiency, and sustainable services. For that, also new business models will be needed, integration, efficiency on all sides, so doing more with less, and reuse of materials and everything. So last but not least, let me say, I think potential of digital revolution is high, but there are also dangers, so we will need social steering. So thank you very much. I'm at the end of my comments. This is some literature on which I base them. Thank you.
Naki, thank you very much. You know, he's very positive, so potential is huge. So that really I liked his talk. But at the same time, the sharing, because of COVID, that we have to rethink about the sharing community, sharing society, so may discuss something about it. Also, IoT is good, but if you want to use a supercomputer or big data that consumes really incredible electricity, that may produce some problems. I like controversial things, so just want to, but it's a very nice starting talk. Thank you very much, Naki. So let's go to our next speaker. And next speaker is Professor Dr. Roy, Foundation Director of Center for South and Southeast Asia Multidisciplinary Research Network on Transforming Societies in the Global South Asian Institute of Technology. So, Professor Dr. Roy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to the august audience. And if I go to my next slide, please. Yes. So, when we talk of the demand-side solutions, so a frequently asked question is, so now it means all the responsibilities lie with the individuals for mitigation. The answer is that when we tried to make an assessment in the IPCC report, this time the 5th chapter was on demand, services, and societal aspects of mitigation. We showed that yes, people do matter, but then people act in the society in different capacities, like a citizen, an investor, a role model, or a policymaker. So it's not that people act in a vacuum. They are enabled by, or they're empowered by the access to infrastructure or technology, and they are incentivized by the policies and various governance structures. So what matters is that we need to also understand that within the society there are inequality. Historically, we are going with this inequality, and 1% of the population emit 15% of the emission. So but then there are 90% population who are contributing only 48% of the emission. So for them, there will be increase in demand for energy. So the question is that there will be some demand increase for energy in some parts of the world. So going ahead, how we communicate the demand-side solutions is really important, because we have shown in our assessment also that more efficient end-use conversion can improve services while reducing the need for upstream energy by 45% by 2050 compared to 2020. What it simply means is that we were trying to look into different countries, and we were trying to see that how at different phases of their fast economic growth, how efficient they were in providing their GDP growth. So if we look into the countries, then we will see that still now where the demand will be growing, say for example, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and so Bangladesh and Pakistan, we can see that they have huge efficiency gap. That means they are using more energy to provide 1 unit of GDP, whereas India has been on the energy efficient path for a very long time. But China also was growing more energy efficiently during their fast economic growth process, but then for South Korea, the story was different, and for Malaysia was also story different. So what it means is that there is enough scope for efficient service provision in India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Pakistan, whereas China and India are on their efficient growth path. Also, what we need to understand is that for demand and service provision, we do need new investment, and a range of 5 to 30% of global annual GHG emissions are reducible through new repurposed infrastructure, service provision through compact cities, co-location of jobs and housing, more efficient use of floor space and energy in buildings, and relocation of street spaces for active mobility. And these are the ways how these newly growing, fast-growing economies can provide all these services at with lesser energy. Also, what we need to understand is that demand-side measures and new ways of end-use service provision can reduce global GHG emission in end-use sector by 40 to 70% by 2050 compared to the baseline scenario. This is extremely important to understand, because when we are looking into the different sectors, say for example, food and nutrition sector, industry, and building, electricity and land transport, then we see that these colored bars are showing that how much one can reduce the through the demand-side intervention. If we do not have the demand-side intervention, the whole burden goes on the supply side, which is in the left-hand side, light-colored gray bar. But if we include the demand-side interventions, then we can see that the supply-side burden reduces to the gray-colored bars on the right-hand side. So you can shift the burden from the supply-side high-cost solutions with the low-cost, easily available technologies in the demand side. So also what is important is that sometimes we say that food is a cultural choice, personal choice, but also, you know, in food waste reduction and dietary choice, we find that the need for technology and infrastructure, consumer protection, and information are extremely important to empower consumers. And we have seen, we made an assessment from the global studies, and we could see that actually for food waste reduction, the supply chain managers have a very important role to play. And in dietary choice, actually, the choice architects, then the information, advertisement, and the media has very important role to play to empower individuals. And also in the electricity demand, as we know, we are going for more electricity-dependent economies in the future. What we try to see is that even in the electricity demand side sectors, in all the sectors like industry, land, transport, buildings, and load management, there are a lot of potential which are shown by these colored bars. And in the load management, that means where the demand side flexibility can be included in the energy supply service through pricing, monitoring, the AI, the storage diversification has immense role to play. And we tried to do that for India, and then we could see that demand side flexibility actually lowers the supply cost of electricity by 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour compared to if we do not include the demand side flexibility, the supply cost becomes higher. So more technological options on the generation or demand side reduce system inefficiency and lower the cost of electricity. So what also matters is that we must remember that each and every country has committed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So we could see in our IPCC report that demand side mitigation response options help in achieving SDGs. If we look into just the urban green and blue infrastructure, they have all the positive impacts on across all the SDGs. If we look into the reduced food loss and food waste, shift to balanced and sustainable healthy diets, we see that all the positive impacts across all the Sustainable Development Goals. So with all these words, we want to say that there are enough off-the-shelf solutions which we are ignoring, but we need to pay our attention to through technology, policy, and innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Roy. It was a really nice overview and also very positive. Enough solution on the shelf, and we have to help each other. Even among 7 countries in Asia, we can learn from each other, and demand side intervention is really the power, a big element. So that would be very nice. And electricity-wise, I think our 4th speaker, Mr. Gunda, may mention something about it. Well, let's go to our 3rd presentation. And next speaker is Dr. Niamir, research scholar of Energy, Climate, and Environment Program, International Industry for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria. So she is the young expert as well. So Dr. Niamir, the floor is yours. She's on the web.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your very nice invitation, and it's my honor to be here and presenting part of my work and studies. Would you please share my slides? Excellent. I'm going to talk mostly about the behavior change in this. So next slide. I would start in that perspective that in our latest assessment of the IPCC shows that if we continue what we did in the past, actually in a red one, we will end up with a 3.2 degrees Celsius. And this is not a way that we want to reach. But in case that we want to limit our warming to 1.5 degree, it requires that greenhouse gas emissions to peak before 2025 and reduce by almost half by 2030. And the same scenario for 2 degrees Celsius. It should basically peak before 2025 and reduce by quarter by 2030. So it means that we do need really do the action now, unless we will not reach to our targets that we put. So far, all the strategies, I mean, the question here is how we can reach to these targets, but so far all the strategies was on supply side and how renewable energies and technology could reduce these greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. In the latest assessment of IPCC, actually, it was the first time that there was a dedicated chapter on the demand side and how through the demand side we can basically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how is the potentials. Next slide. In this, you saw this basically figure, but I'm going to focus on a social cultural factors, which is actually the blue bars that you can see. In our chapter, basically, we try to look through the 3 categories that previous speaker, Professor Roy, captured about the infrastructure and technology, but I'm going to really focus on social cultural factors and behavior change. Next slide. This actually is different from the different sectors. I mean, we can have a different variables or different strategies and incentives through the lowering our demand. Meanwhile that I'm talking about this and giving the assessment what we did in the IPCC, I would like or encourage you to think about it, how much you also do these actions. For example, in food, shifting toward the balance and plant-based diets and reducing food waste shows that we have a potential about a 40% reduction, which also could go up to 87%. This is a most important point for demand side. Next slide. For example, in a mobility system or in a basically transport sector, teleworking or telecommunication, active mobility, basically shifting toward or choosing walking and cycling shows about a 5% reductions and up to 15 percentage of the mitigation potential. Next slide. And also, same story for the building sector. I mean, all the social practices that resulting the energy saving, basically adjusting our temperature or changing our dress code by wearing warm clothes in a winter time to reduce our energy, and also changing the lifestyle and behavior, bringing more plants and etc. in our buildings, that also brings about a 50% and up to 50% of reduction. Next slide. And in an industry sector, basically using or consuming the intensive use of a longer life and repairable products, basically try to repair and reuse the products, also give about 5%. Next slide. So actually, this is my very very first-hand experience. I asked people, okay, these are elements, but why you are not taking these actions, or what elements that avoid you to go through these actions? Next slide. So what I did, I tried to categorize or find the patterns and find what would be the solution. For example, many people reached that this is not does not really necessarily, or I don't care. Maybe other people could do that. This also could capture by information campaign or bringing more awareness. Next slide, please. So, and then the other one is mostly regarding to the infrastructure. They don't have infrastructure and the accessibility to them. Next slide. Others goes to basically they do need the assist. I mean, they cannot afford it, so we don't need the assist to help them to go for it. Next slide. Goes and this one is needs that also kind of collective action and assistance that give them to go through that. And then the last one, next slide. And this is also going to that basically we do need a democracy and also going through these actions. And then my last slide for summing up is that, next slide please. Yeah, so in wrapping up is that every action that we are doing is matter, and we can have a policy packages and programs to basically shift toward that I also show the patterns is like from the information campaign, collective action, assistance, and infrastructure design and expansion that actually lead to better implementation of the behavior change. Thanks for your attention. Looking forward for a discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Niemir. It's really wonderful talk, and it's really so nice to have this from young generation. So it's the future for us and for beautiful Earth, like Naki said. Yes, others do not care. Why should I? I hope none of you are saying that. So there's, of course, other factors, house insulation, or the warm clothes and house insulation for this energy consumption, etc. But it was quite a nice view. Now we're coming to the fourth speaker from the business side, and next speaker is Mr. Gunda. He's vice chair of California Energy Consumption. So, Mr. Gunda, he's join us through the web. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Reiko and Dr. Kenzie for moderating this panel and the opportunity to be here with the rest of our panelists who are very well knowledgeable in this area, and look forward to adding context from the California side. So if you can bring up my slides, please. Yeah, next slide. So California is implementing an ambitious climate goal, and I want to structure my presentation within the context of the electricity planning and how it's the backbone for some of the climate goals in California. So California has a goal towards carbon neutrality by 2045. California has about 40 million people, fifth largest economy, and home for more than 100 tribal nations. So it's a very diverse community. So the backbone for the carbon neutrality planning in California is really electrification. Large amount of end users electrified, and hence cleaning the electric grid becomes an important element. So we have some plans, 100% clean energy by 2045, but along the way, it should say 95% by 2040 and 90% by 2035. Sorry for the typo there. Next slide, please. So we have been making good progress in California since as you see here in 2013, we were at 41% clean energy, we're about 59% in 2020. It fluctuates, depending on how much hydro we have on the system, but we are on our path to the 2045 goals. Next slide, please. So what that does mean is that a humongous amount of build. So we are going to talk about demand side, but I just wanted to contextualize the supply side real quick here. We are talking about adding a lot of supply side resources and anywhere from tripling to quadrupling the electricity grid from today's size. And then when you talk about building that much, it has to be built at an extremely fast pace. And the question becomes, how can we reduce the amount of build rates? And that's where the demand side comes into the equation. Next slide, please. So when we are doing this, the problem that California has been experiencing since 2020 is climate change is not a concept anymore for California, but it's a reality. Since 2020, we have been having extreme weather conditions, both in terms of heat, fire, but also drought. So this chart here just kind of shows you how the heat, for example, on the temperature side, is becoming more and more frequent and higher, both in terms of specific days, but also the length of the duration of the heat waves that are occurring in California. Next slide, please. So, and click again. So when we talk about the climate risk, the first thing when we do in the electricity planning is, we have to plan to some traditional planning standards, which is to make sure that we have enough resources to meet the demand and statistically reduce the chance of having a blackout no more than one time every 10 years. So that's kind of how we plan. Click next, please. But what happens is when you're trying to build it, and you're trying to make sure you're not overbuilding, the assumptions that you start with in terms of procuring new resources, by the time you finish the procurement in a year or a year and a half from then, you're already stale and you have some potential lag. So we have to begin to overbuild to make sure we are meeting those changes in temperature. Next, click please. But then once you meet the standards, then comes the issue of, are we able to build as fast as we want, right? So first you can procure, but we might not be able to build it because of many issues right now happening: supply chain, inflation, permitting, all sorts of issues. Click please. The next compounding issue to that is, okay, we ordered, but we were not able to build fast enough. But then are we experiencing situations that are outside our planning statistics, right? So that's where it comes in terms of very high heat, which is not expected within the planning models. Click, please. And finally, on the top of that, okay, we built it, but then the problem becomes, what if there is a fire, which is something that we are having recently. For example, last year in July, we lost 4,000 megawatts of transmission capacity into California because of fire. And we rely on imports, and suddenly 4,000 megawatts short in an instant. So one more click, please. So what we're talking about is, as we are planning, we also have to plan for the volatility of the climate risk in terms of making sure we are reliable. Next click, please. Okay, so as we move towards this, we're obviously moving to a clean energy transition, and we have to build a lot of clean resources. But it also, what our modeling shows is that the current amount of natural gas fossil fleet, thermal fleet that we have on the system has to be retained for a very long time. So 85% of the fleet continues to retain. And as you see here, majority of that thermal fleet that is not clean is all in poor communities. So it becomes imperative, how do you reduce that burden on the communities? And again, that points to demand side opportunities. One more click, please. So here's some experience. The next 3 slides, I'm going to provide some experience of what we observed. This is what we call the Flex Alert performance over the last several years. So in 2020, when we experienced our extreme heat wave, we've done all sorts of communications, anywhere from the governor's office reaching out, putting out statements, calling out a Flex Alert, putting signs on the highways. And we've seen some reduction. We've seen some reduction of conservation almost in the 2,000 megawatt range, and it really helped us get past blackouts. We did have 2 blackouts in 2020, but we were able to avoid the rest of them. In 2021, as you see here, the numbers begin to shrink, and you really begin to see the fatigue. You keep calling, and then the results kind of become lower and lower. But even amongst that, you can observe that whenever, for example, the governor reaches out with a message, it does show the importance of it. And it kind of goes to what Dr. Neymar was talking about in terms of people believing and being educated in the need to respond. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an important slide. This is what just happened on September 6th. What you're seeing here on the green line is our demand. So this is the demand, as you see here, we almost hit 52,000 megawatts in September. We planned for 44,000. So we were 7,000 megawatt departure from what we planned for because of the heat wave. But as you see there, we were also out on track to hit 53,000. What you're seeing in the red line there is the time when we reached into our pocket for every demand side program we have. So as you kind of begin to deploy the demand side programs, you shave off the peak. But even with all of that, we were going into a very high peak and we're going to have a blackout. And at that time, about 5:45, the governor's office took an extraordinary event of sending an alert, Amber Alert, to fit 22 million customers on a cell phone signal, right? So the text message got, and within 20 minutes, we saw a response of over 3,000 megawatts. And it avoided the disaster of a potential blackout. But again, how do you make that happen over and over, and how do you ensure that people can respond and not feel uncomfortable doing this? Next slide, please. So the key questions are then, how do you transition from voluntary appeals to dependable and sustainable long-term solutions in terms of demand response? And how do you value the contribution of demand response to reliability, right? And compensate it appropriately, meaning, can you count on the demand showing up, right? I mean, how much do you value? And then finally, how do you transition demand response from behavior change to a lifestyle? How do you bake the demand response into more of a transformational side? And what is the role of automation in making that happen? So this is something that we're dealing with in California. Demand response has an humongous opportunity, but also challenges in making sure that it actually shows up. So with that, I conclude, and thank you. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunda. It was a wonderful talk. California is really advanced in many aspects, but also he showed the recent experience he encountered. And because you're facing the blackout risk, many people cooperated. However, as he said in the last slides, how can we make it a lifestyle change? That's really difficult, You can be a vegan for a week, but you may start eating beef next week or next month, or you start using electricity as just after oil shock. We start increasing our consumption. So that also gives us something to discuss about. So thank you very much for a wonderful talk. Now we're coming to our last but not least talk, and this is Dr. Konishi Nagano. She is a manager of Environment Design Department, Environment Division Sustainability Unit, Fujitsu, and Japan Electronics and Information Technology Industries Association. So, Dr. Konishi Nagano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for introduction, Professor Kuroda. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tomoko at Fujitsu. On behalf of the JETA, today I'd like to talk about Green Digital Consortium, about data visualization project. My talk is about companies' behavior change and challenges. This Green Digital Consortium was established October 2021. Right now, 100 companies and organizations are involved. Very big project and challenging. This slide shows about overall of our activity, data visualization project. We will undertake the following activity to accurately gauge and pursue reduction of the supply chain emission with a particular factor focus on scope 3. Scope 3 meaning indirect emission, such as mining and transport, usage and recycle. We have three purposes. One is create method, guideline for collecting and calculating and sharing carbon emission data. Second is that considered methodology, technology, and stakeholder standard format for data. Third one is conduct and proof of concept experiment on data linkage between carbon data emission visualization solution. Please look at a left side slide diagram. We are talking about supply chains, meaning mining and transport, also manufacturing, and also final production manufacturing and sales phase. In this kind of supply chain, we would like to visualize CO2 emissions. In our activity, we have two teams. One is methodology teams. Another is a technical spec team. We, Fujitsu, is leading of technical spec team. In this, those teams are referred to WBS WBCSD's Pathfinder framework and Pathfinder network feature a global standard for the carbon emission calculation method. In this session, we would like to discuss about drivers of the behavior change in energy consumption. We think achieving carbon neutral target for conduct managing and for seeking greener supplier, seeking greener production are important. And induction of the investment by appealing that the sustainable companies focusing on carbon neutrality is very important. We would like to promise to reduce carbon emissions by 2050. In that time, what can we do together in industry? So we are making a big challenge for this project. Second part of my point, policy and framework to facilitate the energy demand side. So business competitiveness is important. Right now, investment into the global initiative and track with the global partnership with using the same philosophy and framework. For company side, we have to thinking about global supply chains, not only in Japan. So we communicate with WBCSD's Pathfinder framework and network as a global philosophy and methodology. This slide shows about 2 steps of the proof of concept of the CO2 emissions data exchange. A POC is planned from the end of this year to next year in 2 phases. First phase as a preparation. The Pathfinder network's data items and API specification will be used to confirm the interoperability of multiple CO2 visualization and data exchange solutions. In phase 2, we use case studies will be set in accordance with users' requirement, and data exchange will be tested based on those assumed use cases. Of course, it's going to be so difficult to combine idea of the different company, but we have a method. The method is a global method. It's the same. So supplier, assembly company, solution user, and end user, we are joining that POC. We'd like to find that difficulty and challenging point, then we'd like to show in the society after the POC. The final message of this slide and social innovation and technology. We think technologies for linking primary data to supply chains, for example, blockchains, being tamper-proof and ensuring the traceability are important. And also, we would like to show and visualize our effort of the industrial companies. We are investment a lot of things to do the reducing carbon emission, but it's difficult to show to the customers. So we would like to making a good solution to visualize our effort to the society. We have a homepage of the Green Digital Consortium in English. If you are interested, please visit. And if you are interested in our project, please contact me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kanishi Nagano. It's really important to have visualization of data which will be used for a more efficient consumption. And not necessarily for manufacturing product, but even banana in Japan, it comes from Taiwan, Philippines, but sometimes Ecuador, and start wondering why. So everything it's coming from passing through various supply chains, and all these things we may have to rethink about it as well. Anyway, thank you very much for these very interesting, varied 5 presentations. Now I think we're coming to the discussion, but you're going to? Yeah, okay, so Professor Dr. Yamaji is going to moderate the discussion sessions.
Okay, I will take the role of moderator for discussion part of this session. The remaining time I watch is 26 minutes. And after the question and answer session, Professor Kroda will make a wrap up.
All
So
right.
about 20 minutes or so we have a time for discussion. I think my schedule is I will, every presentation is very impressive, I think. And I will provide some short comment, including some questions, each of you. Then the floor is open to the audience. We will welcome your questions and comments. Okay, so first, Naki, your talk is very concise, but a very good overview of the demand, energy demand transformation. I have no, how to say, uncertainty or something. But one single concept you mentioned in your slide 2, sufficiency. Sufficiency is a very subjective item, so it's very difficult to manage. How do you think about, you invented the word of sufficiency corridor. What do you mean by this corridor?
Thank you, Kenji, very much for this quite a difficult question, to be honest. This was at the conceptual level. I think that there is no doubt that many people are excluded and do not even reach the basic needs. And I was arguing that we need to do better than that. We have to go toward a decent life. Now, so that's about too little. And overconsumption is, in my view, about too much. There is no doubt that inequality has increased in the world over the last few decades. I think that's one of our problems in addition to the multiple crises we have. And if we are going to, I think, enter an era where we head toward net zero emissions for sustainability, and I would argue many co-benefits for the world, it is important also to curb the consumption at the top. But the devil is in the detail. I fully agree with you. I do not have the quantifications of that. I think the next step would be to try to do that in the scenarios. As you might know, I was involved in quite lots of studies trying to identify the basic needs and going beyond them, and that is a challenge. And I think on the other side of too much, we'll have the same challenge. So I apologies for the imprecise answer, but I would say that the conceptual notion of a corridor is still important. If we are going to share the resources of this planet and make peace with nature, we cannot overconsume. And I think other speakers have spoken about changes, not just in diet, stopping the waste, reuse, new lifestyles. Let me just conclude my response with a new European Commission initiative called the New Bauhaus. I will not go into the details, but the idea here is to have beautiful environment, not just sustainable environment, but also beautiful environment. But that again would mean not over-consuming and certainly having decent life for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Jeffrey. Your talk is also comprehensive, and I'm quite impressed. But I just point out only one part of your presentation. You mentioned about the food. Later also mentioned about food. But to me, it sounds, it is the energy demand side. So you focused on the consumption end of food. But the food supply waste occurs from production, transport, storage, and retail, and consumption. So supply chains should cover to reduce the energy demand of food waste. How do you think about that supply chain waste reduction?
So basically, there are two parts in it. If you see my first presentation, then what we wanted to say is that if we look into the food waste reduction, so the studies show that the food that gets wasted at the consumer end, say at the departmental store and the storage facilities, etc. So there, if you look into that waste and calculate, if you reduce that, how much of land will be saved, so how much of actually the production related emission, so upstream emission can be reduced. So this was one of the calculation. And then the next slide where we showed the different actors and who are involved in reducing the food waste, we saw that it is definitely the whole supply chain which also matters. So it's just not the individual choice, but then individual different kind of actors. So individual is one, but then also the different supply chain actors and the departmental stores, the restaurants, they serve a big meal which we can't finish, but then social norm is that you can't take back in your home because that the social norm doesn't allow you to take the takeaway in your home. So all these, if you consider, then you can see that there are role of different actors in the whole process for reduction in the food waste, definitely. And we do need different incentives and policies and labeling. Just we saw that even if you take away the expiry date of the food which are there, if you look into that, even if you reduce it, we have seen many studies have shown that even if you extend it by 7 days, the food doesn't actually get bad, they are still consumable, but then how you manage that. So those labeling also very important. So revisiting all those is extremely important.
Okay, thank you very much. So next is Leila, and I'm quite impressed with her presentations. So behavioral change is very important. So information campaign or corrective actions are very important. And but one word I rather concerned, it's democratization you mentioned in the last but one slide, I think. Okay, I understand what you like to say, but digital transformation has many phases. It contributes to democracy, but also it makes autocracy more efficient. So it may be a difficult question, but how do you think about the democratization and behavioral change to reduce demand, energy demand? Of course, include your response to the food issues too.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your great question. And actually, yeah, it's a quite difficult question. But what I actually mean here, and I wanted to bring up, is that a little bit also very much links to the equity. I mean, the things that we want to, that all of us, no one actually stands behind. All of us are doing all changes together. So of course, in a low-income basically group people, or the people cannot afford for example, the different type of the food, or for example, installing the solar PVs. So these are things that we do need to help them, is kind of to bring everyone in one speed to change their behavior. So that's why that's why I brought that. For example, in my personal studies also, I saw that there are many people that they are very much motivated and willing to change, and they care about the environment, they care about their future Earth and their next generations. But simply they cannot do that because either they don't own the house, for example, to do the changes, because, for example, in Europe, you do need to be an owner of the house if you want to change for example, the insulation or install a solar PV, or they cannot basically afford it because maybe it's expensive for that. And that's why I think this is a very important point, that we keep everyone in one place and no one left behind. This is a very important point, and that's why I brought the democracy point and equity here. I hope that I answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Next is Shiba Gunda. Okay, Mr. Shiba Gunda. Okay, I understand. So demand flexibility has a very significant effect to accept massive bearing renewable energies. And that is one thing, but one a bit remote from the demand side, but I stick to some slide. It's the fourth slide. It's a projected increase annual cost 6% above 60 RPS baseline. Okay, you listed several electricity generation technologies and existing resources and projected new resources. I'm a bit surprised at the lower three parts, hydrogen, hydropower, and nuclear is currently supplying substantial capacity. But for the 2030 and 2045, it is not available. Not available means it's not necessarily zero, but after particularly the Ukraine war, Europe, some parts of Europe, and including Japan, nuclear is re-evaluated and to rethinking about availability of nuclear in the future. How is the situation in California about nuclear?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kinsey. A really important question. So I just I want to set the stage of the broad strokes of how nuclear is kind of thought in California and where we are today. So as the slide kind of shows, we have one nuclear power plant today, last remaining nuclear power plant, which was scheduled to close down by 24 and 25. It has 2 units. So about 1,200 of that, 1,100 of that was to be shut down at the end of 2024, and the rest of it is in 2025. And there is a moratorium in California to not build any more nuclear. And the reason for opposition for nuclear in California is really the earthquake danger. Is one of the perspectives, just the safety of nuclear, given that California has a lot of seismic activity, but also the disposal of nuclear waste. Those have been kind of the statewide perspectives on why nuclear was not seen as a future portfolio resource. But very recently, given what happened in September, but prior to that, early, I think about May 2022, the California Energy Commission, the agency that I work for, put out some analysis suggesting how extreme of the situation it could be and some of the extreme shortfalls that we might experience on the supply side. And we've quantified it to be about 7,000 to 10,000 megawatts, and that's what manifested this year. So based on that, the legislature very recently, about a month ago, has put out language to essentially continue the operation of the last nuclear power plant, at least keep the option open to continue operating that beyond the current scheduled closure date. So I think nuclear is a very complex situation in California. There is both a lot of support in California for nuclear, but also a lot of opposition because of safety. So at this point, there is a recognition that, as you mentioned, given what's happening in Europe, for us it's the energy security is more of a climate-driven issue, and recognizing that we could have reliability issues. At least the retirement of the nuclear power plant could be postponed. At least the conditions for that have been set up. So we are in a situation of reevaluating from a reliability assessment, but nuclear as a resource has very strong opposition and support. So we have been also asked by the legislature to look at what other alternatives are there for nuclear. So for example, if we are going to retire that on time, could we make that up with other resources? Whether it might be more demand response, whether it could be fuel cells, hydrogen, and so on. So So that's kind of the sentiment in California overall and nuclear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then lastly, Nagano-san. I think the data visualization that will be promoted in Green and Digital Consortium is very important to introduce Scope 3 accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. But you talked the rather general part, description of this green by digital approach. But the theme of this session is a demand-driven energy transformation. So the green by digital approach, what kind of effect is concretely realized in demand-driven energy transformation? If you add several examples, I will welcome.
Thank you very much for your comment. As much as I know, I'd like to answer. For seeking greener supplier and making a green production, in that time, if we are making something product in manufacture phase, then we using renewable energy. In that time, carbon footprint during that manufacture phase will be reduced. This is a very big drive for the demand, especially for investor and greener supplier, especially for government needed to be greener production. In that time, they are choosing below carbon dioxide production, so green production. In that time, we are saving the production energy, but using renewable energy in the production phase. For example, in my company, we are using renewable energy in a factory. 100% using renewable energy in the factory. In that time, reducing carbon emission is very low. In that case, a brand owner making a decision to making a green production, this is a very big driver to making energy demand for using renewable energy. Okay. I hope my answer is helpful for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, now floor is open to the audience, including online participants. But there is some information that no question from online platform. So how about the audience in this room? Please raise your hand and identify yourself.
Yeah, but you can put the light on.
It's against the light, so.
Cannot see well, but.
But seemingly no hand is raised, right? Okay, then we have 9 minutes left. So, okay. Still waiting the question or comment from the audience. Oh, okay, one person, please go. Some mic is coming. Wait for them.
So my name is Hirose. I'm ex-engineer of the industry. So thank you very much for the very interesting. And also, I have been struggling to implement the new technology into the society because it was very hard to develop a new technology, but it's more difficult to implement the technology into the society. And especially those, if you can save the money by implementing new technology, or if you are in the trend to follow like as a green or the friend of the earth or this, but in certain points, unless those are benefits for the customer, it is quite difficult. So, and also especially for those, if you save the 30% by spending $10, $20 for $100 product, it's relatively easy. But if you need to save the last 10%, 20% by doubling the price of the product or this, the engineerically possible, but how we can change the people's mind, this is more difficult. And also this is the point probably we need to investigate more. So innovation for class forum is tend to be more engineering development, but I think that today's discussion, like the related to the human psychology, and these are more investment or development necessary. So I think this is quite good forum today, but for us, we need a lot more investment necessary to analyze and develop the technology. Sorry, that's a little comment, but from my feeling, yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any volunteer to respond? Okay, Jocelyn. Yeah. And then Naki.
So basically, this was very much in discussion when we were writing the chapter on demand side, this time in IPCC. So what we found was that advertisement has played a very important role for social acceptance. And corporates have been following this strategy for influencing the human behavior, and humans have also responded quite well. So what kind of advertisement needs to be there? Say, for example, earlier in 70s, we grew up saying that use and throw lifestyle. But now we are saying that we need long-lived products, so that product lifetime need to go up, right? So the advertisement which we grew up in 1970 need to change now to change the lifestyle. So advertisement is a very important medium. We have seen it has played a role historically. The second thing we saw that nudging does matter, but the nudging, unless connected to the price incentive, it doesn't stay longer. So price incentive and the nudging, they need to go together. Say, for example, if you say that, okay, just the example you got from California, it showed that during a crisis, people responded, but then also you need to make it permanent, you need a price incentive. I'll just give an example. Say in India, there was a time, say 10 years back, or 5-6 years back, when the Prime Minister announced that there will be the LPG-driven cooking fuel for whole of rural India to do away with the wood-based cooking system. So the LPG was given subsidy for the urban households. So there was a call to the urban households to give up the subsidy so that the money can be used for subsidizing the rural poor. And that's how this was a call initially, but then the subsidy was gradually withdrawn from the urban households. So it was a price incentive as well as the moral suasion, as we say in economics, but also the nudging. So this is something which we need to be very careful, that just not to one single policy, but we need to see how a portfolio policy can be brought together. And we have many historical examples, how do we do it? And for high cost ones, you can have staggered payment structure so that people can afford to make the payment.
Okay, Naki.
Yes, thank you. I fully agree with what you said, and I think multiple complementary policies are the key. For example, standards and other things could be added to the list. But I just also wanted to make a general comment on the comment. I think nowadays it's very easy to be pessimistic about the future given all of the crises we have in the world. And to achieve this on the end use, which I think the demand side reductions I think are the key for the sustainable future. But to do that, I think we need a positive narrative, not just the negative narrative. And in my view, the positive narrative includes highlighting the multiple benefits of this transformation. I think that's the key. I mean, that would be the benefits that brings to all of us. I think the mobile phone example I brought is such a case. The replacement of horses by cars is another. And these are the things that happen over the time of only 30 years, a fundamental transformation. So I think it is possible by 2050, but we need, I think, a good story that people actually believe that it's doable and that it'll bring benefits.
Okay, thank you very much. For the time's sake, this is the end of the discussion session. Thank you for your cooperation. So remaining time is for you.
Okay, so really want to hear more from the floor and from the online people. However, it's time and I have to wrap up. Now, just so the demand side intervention is very important, although it's nudging is not enough, price incentive is important, the policy intervention is required, and all these are sort of important. However, this demand side intervention can influence the supply chain side as well. But one says every action matters, yes, and also how we can change the urgent case behavior change to lifestyle change, that we have to think about it. So Mr. Hirose from the floor asked us, told us it's quite nice to have this behavior session. And actually we started this behavior session last year. I was a moderator or coordinator of that session. We talked about the behavioral science and all these things. And so I think it's important. Technology side, governance side, policy side, also the consumer side. So the last, I like the Naki's comment, not necessarily sustainable, but beautiful environment. We really have to aim at it. And I would say emotion and motion are two sides of one coin. So we really have to be emotionally work together to have not only sustainable, but beautiful Earth. Thank you very much for attending this session and also asking questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to close this session.